and welcome to She Thinks, a podcast where you're allowed to think for yourself. I'm your host, Beverly Hallberg, and on today's episode, Kristin Shapiro joins us to talk about an issue that not only has traction in the states, but is also gaining steam federally, the issue of paid family leave, with so many Democrat candidates talking about it, and some of them even having a detailed plan. It's important to know the pros and the cons of both government and non-government proposed policies. Before we jump into the conversation with Kristin, a little about her. She is a lawyer and a senior fellow with the Independent Women's Forum. She has litigated numerous cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. And in 2016, Kristin was selected by SuperLawyers as a rising star in the D.C. area. Know that you can check out her commentary, which appears regularly in publications such as the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Kristin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And before I ask you the first question, I just want our audience to know that you have a recent policy focus out on IWF.org. It's called Expanding Paid Family Leave Without Disadvantaging Low-Income Families. So for those interested, again, you can find that at IWF.org. But I wanted to start the conversation by talking about where things are on proposed policies. You have candidates releasing plans, you have Congress battling over proposed legislations. States are passing laws. Where are things today on the paid family leave issue?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, Beverly, things are happening left and right all over the place. So at the state level, I think it's now 8 states have, and the District of Columbia have passed paid family and medical leave acts. These are funded by payroll taxes on workers and employers. To pay into basically a new government entitlement at the state and local level to fund benefits in the event of, for maternity leave, paternity leave, medical leave, caregiving leave. And then at the federal level, the only legislation that is enacted, well, there's the Family Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, which gives certain workers' rights to unpaid leave for up to 12 weeks each year, but it's not a paid leave. Now, there was, in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there was a tax credit for employers that offer paid leave that met certain requirements. And I believe it was for a 3-year provisional sort of test period. And that didn't really make too much news. So I haven't seen, studies of what sort of effects that had, but that is something that was enacted to encourage employers themselves to provide paid leave. But in terms of current proposals before Congress, I think, everyone listening probably heard quite a lot the common complaint that the United States is the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have a paid parental leave program. And so, there are proposals put forward by both Democrats and Republicans to provide parental leave. Democrats have put forward sort of more sweeping proposals that are in line with what you see in sort of Scandinavian, European, democratic socialist sort of countries that would impose a payroll tax to fund 12 weeks of paid leave for not just parental leave, but also caregiving and medical leave as well. Republicans have introduced proposals modeled actually after the Independent Women's Forum, the proposal I published with IWF, the Social Security Earned Leave proposal, which essentially would allow new parents, give them the option to pull forward about 3 months of early Social Security benefits to a time in their life when they might find them more useful. So because that proposal is different from the Democratic proposals because it's essentially just allowing workers a little bit more control over benefits they would receive anyway. So it doesn't require increased government spending. It doesn't require a new tax. It's just adding a little bit of flexibility to a government program to make it work better for American families. All of these proposals have been introduced as legislation, but they have not gone to a full floor vote. And it doesn't look like that will happen anytime soon. But you never know.
You never know, which is why it's important to talk about it so people are informed with what's going on. And I'm glad you mentioned the one plan that is sponsored by IWF that, of course, you had a role in and thinking through what that would look like. That's been sponsored by Senator Marco Rubio, I believe, that he's been the one that's been pushing that. But I want to go back to the Democrats' plan, their Family and Medical Insurance Leave Act, and they're pushing this. So unlike the plan sponsored by Senator Rubio and IWF, which you all have proposed goes, which is, like you were saying, dipping into Social Security. What the Democrats want to do is dip into your paycheck. So when it comes to the paycheck, I think it's important for us to, first of all, discuss the cost. Free is never free. How much does this essentially cost not just businesses, but employees as well? What do we have a total number of how much money you could see taken out of a business and therefore could be passed on to other people?
Yeah, so the legislation itself, it requires an additional payroll tax of 0.4%, which, seems small, but even that itself is significant. The people like to minimize that cost. Democrat politicians, and talking about it, they say, oh, it's, for the average worker, a cup of coffee a week. Now, actual studies of the Family and Medical Leave Act suggest that it could actually be, 4 times as much. And so, it could be up to, I think maybe $1,500 a year or something on that magnitude for the average worker, which is a very significant amount of money for people who are living paycheck to paycheck.
And for that $1,500, I think it's important, too, that this could be something that, let's think about people who are single or men who may never have children. Think about people who are past childbearing years, that there's a lot of people this isn't even going to touch. Is that why you do see that this is going beyond just maternity leave or paternity leave, but actually going into caring for family? Is that part of the reason why they bring that into it?
That is and that's part of the reason why it costs so much. So if you and this is one of the reasons I kept the proposal I worked with at IWS narrow, is parental leave is a very discrete issue. It's hard to abuse parental leave because you either have a child or you don't. Whereas, I think all of us could think of someone that we know that might, if they have, 12 weeks of leave every year for caregiving or for their own medical issues, could think of a reason why they need 12 weeks every year. And so when you add in those other components, it makes it substantially more expensive. And part of the reason the estimates here are, there's so much daylight between, the most optimistic assumptions about what the Family Act would cost and the most pessimistic or realistic, depending on your perspective, is that it very much depends on how much people actually use the program. And that's something that I tackle in my policy focus that you mentioned that I just published, is that a lot of these programs have such, even including at the state level, they have relatively small payroll taxes. And you think, wow, that's great. We are getting this big program for, a 0.2% payroll tax. But the reason is because only a quarter or less of new parents use the benefit. So for example, in California, only a quarter of new parents use the parental leave benefit. And so you may think, oh, well, the California payroll taxes is not that much when you think about what we're getting. But what you're getting, actually not that many eligible workers are even collecting benefits under the program. And the policy focus actually specifically focuses on the fact that it's actually more likely to be high income and middle income workers that are collecting benefits. These programs, on average, they impose these costs and they redistribute money away from low income families to middle and higher income families.
And something that was even surprising to me as I realized that, since I have a company based in Washington, D.C., and the D.C. paid family leave has gone into effect as of July 1st, that automatically I just had money withdrawn from my bank account. My payroll company just automatically took it out. And so I did a little bit more research into it because, first of all, I have a small company right now. There's only 2 full-time employees, including myself. We do not expect to need to use this type of benefit at any point in time, yet I'm having money taken up from my business. And I started looking into it a little bit more. I never get this money back if it's not being used. This is just money that goes straight to the city, correct? So it's not like a city or if it becomes federal, that it's holding it for you and the business gets it back if you don't use it. It just becomes their money.
Oh, correct. I mean, I'm looking at a chart right now that hopefully summarizes, and it's 0.62% of wages in DC that automatically get deducted, and you don't get them back. For example, this is a disincentive to businesses to offer their own parental leave programs or paid leave programs, because if they're already being taxed to fund a government program, however mediocre, then why in the world would they offer their own benefits or start up a new program for their business? Because you're paying the tax, so might as well just stick with what the government has given workers. quote unquote given workers when, it's actually coming out of their own paychecks.
And something I've even wondered, so if there ever was some type of federal policy that looked more like what the Democrats want or was taken from your paycheck, does that mean if you're in a state, or in my case, a district that already has a policy there, that then there are two policies and you have double tax on that? Or how does that work?
It's a really tricky issue for when you're trying to craft a new federal entitlement program, how to coordinate benefits. I believe the most recent version of the Family Act that I saw, basically just punts the issue and doesn't really specify. I think they say that, I'm looking. Benefits may be reduced based on regulations by the commissioner due to receipt of state temporary disability or family leave benefits. And so it basically leaves it up to regulation. If the Social Security Commissioner wants to not give benefits to workers in states who already have family leave entitlement programs, but those workers are still going to pay the tax. They're just not going to receive the benefits.
Let's talk a little bit about what can happen when it comes to people taking advantage of this type of policy. You were saying a few minutes ago that it's very clear when somebody is pregnant that somebody is pregnant and they are going to need some maternity leave, and maybe paternity leave will be part of that as well. But when it comes to just being able to care for family, or if you're sick, is this something that could also be abused because it's not as clear cut?
I think absolutely that's a huge concern with the program. I mean, we already have issues with Social Security disability insurance for people who, could probably be working, but they collect disability insurance. And so this is just another program to return to. So instead of working, you can collect benefits under this for when really you could work. And it's hard, it's hard for the government to police those situations and to determine, who exactly should be entitled to benefits under this program. And so what happens is there are, inevitably going to be people who could be working, but they choose not to because they can collect benefits under the program.
Let's now turn our attention to the countries that we often hear Democrats want to model their plans after. Let's take a look at some of those countries. I know Scandinavia is one that's often pointed to, that whole region. How have the plans worked for people there, and what have been some of the downsides that you've seen?
Yeah, so that was what my research, the policy focused on is that, after I kind of uncovered the issues with California's parental leave program, I had found research, that only a quarter of new mothers use the benefit, and that, the median leave taker is richer on average under California's program. I thought to myself, California's program is relatively new. They've only had it since 2002. Maybe they just haven't gotten it right. And so I started looking at other countries that also have operated parental leave programs for decades. And, it turns out that this idea that these programs really on average are taking income, disadvantaging the most vulnerable workers, the lowest income families, to provide was essentially a middle and upper class entitlement, is a recurring theme in the literature on this. And so, for example, my policy focus looks at Norway, and they expanded their parental leave entitlement program, and economists studying the expansion, quote unquote, said this was a pure leisure transfer to middle and upper income families at expense of some of the least well off in society. And then, for example, Canada has had a parental leave program for decades. And to kind of provide more concrete numbers of this effect, and two recent studies both found in Canada that about 75 to 85% of mothers in household incomes that are middle or higher income get parental leave benefits from the government, whereas only 45%, about half that, of mothers with lower incomes receive parental leave benefits. And the issue is that everybody's paying the payroll tax in these countries to fund this program, but disproportionately the lower income families are not collecting benefits. And so kind of the hidden Achilles heel of these programs that I'm surprised that people are not talking about is that, while they are sold as we need to have this program because, lower income workers don't have paid leave from their employers, and so that's why we need this big government program. These big government programs are actually becoming more of a problem for lower income families. They're not helping them.
So let's talk a little bit about your proposed solution, which is to be able to draw from Social Security. How has the support been for something along those lines? And do you think that there is a concern that if people are dipping into it, they may then have not only less later on, but that also there's this potential where we all think Social Security is not going to be solvent too far down the road anyway. So are we tapping into a program that just may not be funded before too long?
Yeah, so in terms of who's supporting it, so you mentioned Senator Rubio. In addition, Senator Romney has joined Senator Rubio, as well as Senators Ernst and Lee have introduced their own version of the legislation. And then on the House side, Representatives Wagner and Crenshaw. These are all conservative Republican members of Congress. We haven't seen a Democrat sign on board yet, but I'm optimistic. So we'll see what happens as the legislation gains more traction and more debate. In terms of the two concerns you identified, with respect to the idea that, well, what's going to happen when people retire? Are they going to have less in retirement benefits? I think that one of the key points to underscore is this is entirely voluntary. And so if a family doesn't think that these benefits will work out for them, if they would prefer to, have those months of Social Security benefits rather than, a month after, for parental leave, then they don't have to take it, and their retirement benefits are going to be unaffected. So this just adds options for families that they can choose to take or not, depending upon the best interest of their family. And I think that leaving this decision as local as possible, which at this instance means giving the decision-making power to the family, will produce the best outcomes for families because they know their circumstances better than the government. And then in terms of this Social Security solvency, obviously everyone is concerned with, left and right with the Social Security solvency and the fact the trust funds, will run out in 2034. Now, just to give some basic background facts, I think I certainly in my generation, we were sort of brought up to believe that we just won't have Social Security because it's going to be completely broke. And that's a bit of an exaggeration. So what will happen when the trust funds run out in 2034 is that the Social Security benefits will have to be covered entirely by incoming payroll tax receipts. Those are projected to cover between 75 and 80% of Social Security benefits. So, it's obviously significant, and it's obviously something policymakers should address because even a 25% cut in benefits is substantial, especially for lower income people. But it's not the absolute nightmare, all of a sudden no one's going to have any Social Security scenario that a lot of us are kind of led by hyperbolic media articles to believe. And now to put the parental leave program in the context of Social Security's finances, Social Security costs about $1 trillion a year, and the parental leave program will cost a fraction of a percent of that spending. So even if nothing were done, and the Social Security tomorrow started paying out parental leave benefits, it would have a very small effect on the insolvency date of the trust funds. However, as I mentioned, the senators who are supporting this legislation, Rubio, Romney, Ernst and Lee, and then Representatives Wagner and Crenshaw. I mean, these are fiscal conservatives. They don't want to support a policy that would advance the trust fund insolvency by even a day. And so they're crafting their policies so that they have no impact at all on the solvency of Social Security. And in fact, the Social Security actuaries have scored, I believe it was Senator Rubio and Romney's legislation, and said it would have a negligible impact on Social Security's finances. So this is a program that we could adopt. That would provide benefits to parents, and it would not hurt Social Security.
And I'm glad you brought up the word choice because I think that's a big component of this because not everybody is going to need to dip into it. And tell me a little bit about businesses who already provide these types of benefits to employees as one of the reasons why people may not even need to tap into Social Security for this if this legislation did pass is because when businesses don't have tax being taken out, they tend to want to retain employees that are good employees and provide these types of benefits anyways, correct?
Absolutely. So I feel like every single day I'm seeing an article by a new company that's offering parental leave to its employees. And they want to tout it publicly because it's good for business, because people want to, give their money to businesses that treat their employees properly. And so most workers actually do have paid leave from their businesses. This is not something that is an issue that the government needs to provide benefits to for most workers. So the numbers are about 66 to 83% of workers in middle and high income families, respectively, have at least some form of paid leave to their employers. And really, it's the lower income workers that are lacking access to paid leave. About a third of them get paid leave from their employers. And so I think when we're looking at, and then remember, there are almost every year now, there's a new state that adopts its own parental leave program, including parental and family and medical leave program. And so, when I think about a proper federal policy for parental leave, I don't think of one that needs to be a one-size-fits-all, program that everyone turns to, that you see in sort of the Scandinavian or, European countries that have these sweeping entitlement programs for parental leave. What I think a proper federal policy needs to be is it needs to be something that fills in the gaps where, for the people who don't get parental leave from their employers or who aren't able to save, and basically something they can turn to as a last resort so that they are able to spend that time, those critical first few months at home with their newborn. But we don't need a sweeping entitlement in general that displaces. In fact, it would be bad to displace employer-provided parental leave. Oftentimes when most employers who provide paid leave do so for, time periods that are more, and wage replacement rates that are more generous than anything the government is contemplating. So, the last thing you want to do is, if you're pro-parental leave, is discourage employers from providing paid leave.
And so final question for you, what are some of the timeframes or benchmarks coming up that you think are important for this issue? Is anything potentially coming up, or we're going to see more discussion on this, on either more states passing these types of laws or federally any legislation that moves?
Yeah, so I think, IWF's own Hadley Heath Manning has been appointed to a board or an advisory board in Colorado to advise them on potential family leave legislation. So I think we might see something interesting coming out of Colorado. We'll see. And, other states are considering it. At the federal level, I think, the two kind of turning points that we might see in the next few months or a year would be where paid leave might become an issue is, I've seen news articles, so this is public knowledge, of Senators Cassidy and Sinema might be teaming up to put forward the first bipartisan proposal for parental leave legislation, and that would certainly reinvigorate the discussion if that occurred. And then, I assume that, as we see more Democratic debates and that parental leave will be an issue that the Democratic presidential candidates raise and want to discuss, on their platforms.
Well, I think bipartisan support is encouraging to hear, but I just personally want to thank you for coming on today and breaking it down a little bit more for me, since I'm paying for it right now, and also for you breaking it down for everyone's listening. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Beverly. I hope you have a wonderful day.
And thank you all for joining us. If you have more interest in the topic we discussed, you can follow Kristin on Twitter. She is at MRSSHAP. So that's MRSSHAP. And also you can find her work and specifically her paid family leave policy focus at IWF.org. Last, if you enjoyed this episode of She Thinks, do leave us a rating or review on iTunes. It does help. And we'd love it if you share this episode and let your friends know where they can find more She Thinks episodes. So from all of us here at Independent Women's Forum, thanks for listening.